Cincy is one of the cutting edge co-op development centers in the US, and they have a new business legacy fund that can financially support conversions of conventional businesses to worker ownership. That's a real new development and something really cutting edge that Co-op Cincy is doing. Another characteristic that makes Co-op Cincy's work unique is the groundbreaking work that Kristen has done in adopting the Mondragon model to the US context. She hosts delegations from around the country, including the participants at their semi-annual Union Co-op Symposium. And Jorgen, I have been happy to attend two of those symposiums, and they're really great and special for the co-op world to connect unions and co-ops. Kristen is a 2016 to 2018 Business Alliance for Local Living Economies Fellow. And before becoming Co-op Cincy's executive director, she has worked for 12 years fostering partnerships between people of faith, union members, and community members of diverse backgrounds. She is a graduate of Xavier University and a lifelong Cincinnati resident, except for 2 years in which she lived in El Salvador. Kristen is a single mother of a resilient daughter with special needs. And she's dear to both Benny and myself and Jorg, as she has supported us in the development of the Southeast Center for Cooperative Development. And she's been a speaker at both of the conferences that were held on worker co-ops in Nashville in 2015 and 2019. So welcome, Kristen. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. That was a really long introduction. I was thinking maybe next that we need to shorten that on our website, if that's what our website says. I'm not sure, but I very much appreciate it. And I am really happy to see wonderful smiling faces, and I love what you are doing and what you are about. And Ellen, I got to listen to your presentation. I am not in academia, but I thought it was great. I'm a big fan of that book they're reviewing. Anyway, I am really pleased to be here. My background, which you heard a lot about, but one thing that wasn't mentioned is I graduated as a theology major. That was at Xavier, a theology major and a peace studies minor. So it is fascinating that I'm and I don't have so involved in like the intricacies of businesses at this time. But in any case, I think I want to verify one thing. Do we have 25 minutes for my presentation and conversation? Is that what we have? Because it looks like Kate is coming on the call. Is that how much time we have?
No,
I just looked at the agenda.
I'm looking at that now too. That's an error. We've got until 11, I think, with you. So we got roughly around 45 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So here's my plan. I think I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then I'd like to direct it, just to make it as relevant as possible. And so I think so we can have as much time as possible in questions and discussion and so forth. But if I'm saying something in 10 minutes that you really feel needs clarified, feel free to interrupt, because that's totally fine. I was really taken by your question around how can faith communities be supportive to cooperatives and developing cooperative ecosystems. And I think there is so much there, so much possibility, such a natural alignment. Basically, just to step back for a moment, I mentioned I was a theology major. What I view my life's work as is helping to create the beloved community, a community where all voices are valued, where resources are shared more equitably, where conflicts are handled constructively, and peacefully. So so I definitely see my work with Co-op Cincy helping to build that beloved community. And that's what I see like a real easy entry point for, and I mean, we could call the beloved community the reign of God. I mean, we could use a lot of different words for what that means, but I see it as a real natural place to intersect. And Rosemary mentioned that we work directly with Mondragon. And what is so interesting, and Co-op Cincy's goal is about creating an economy that works for all, especially those who have been historically excluded. And in working with Mondragon, a fascinating thing about that, which I'm sure you've already gone over, is that it started like a Catholic priest had a really strong impact on that formation. And so Catholic social teaching shows up in the 10 Mondragon principles, which are really, really beautiful principles. But the reason we got so excited about Mondragon in Cincinnati is because it is an absolute proof of concept that, I mean, I think we often think poverty and we think inequality, and it just feels so enormous, like we can't touch it. But here is an example of this teeny tiny place in the world. I mean, the whole Basque region is 2.1 million people. Mondragon, really small part of that, but created this really remarkable community of co-ops, this transformative situation in the midst of total despair. And they figured out a way to completely move the dial on poverty and on inequality. So within a number of decades, they made an unbelievable difference. And when I got to be there about 2.5 years ago, Spain had an unemployment rate of 20%, and that area around Mondragon had 4.1%. So an incredibly resilient model. When you walk around, it's awesome too, because it's not like there's mansions, there's no homeless people, but it's just like a thriving community. It's what I want to see in Cincinnati. I want to see it in Nashville. I want to see it everywhere. And so and I would just say, in terms of inequality, that Gini coefficient that measures that around the world, like that area, the Basque region and Mondragon, of that, which is pretty neat. So I think this family of co-ops. It says my internet connection is unstable, so let me know if you lose me. But this family of co-ops is such a neat model because it's not one co-op. One of the things I like that Ellen was highlighting is how hard it is. Like how hard it is to build a viable business, much less build a business of shared ownership where everyone is participating. These are such tough tasks. And they're especially tough if you are one business on your own in this global economy. And so I think one of the major geniuses of Mondragon is this deep interconnection, this where each co-op business is not on its own, is part of this network. They're actually part of lots of networks, but they give 10% of their profits to the larger whole and democratically distribute where that goes. Also have arrangements among themselves where when one is in a down cycle of the economy, other ones will take on those workers and retrain. So it's like an incredibly beautiful system. And I'd say part of why I think Mondragon has over 75,000 workers employed in a network of over 100 cooperatives. And we in the United States, so that's again 2.5 million people. Well, 2.1 million people, and that's what they've got going. We in the US have 330 million people, and we have about 7,000 people employed in worker-owned cooperatives. Like, what? So, like, the thing is that I think it's because they have approached it in such this systemic ecosystem way that is truly profound. So I think they've done that. And then they have a massive focus on education and on their beautiful principles. Ellen highlighted the 7 principles. Mondragon adds 3 more, which are all kind of economic. they're like really highlighting that that this is people before profits. So they say that in a more complicated way. They say labor is sovereign. Um, they say capital is instrumental but subordinate to labor. So those are two separate principles, and then they have one of wage solidarity. So that's kind of how it differs. They're kind of calling out these things as pretty fundamental and wanting to like put some focus on there. Um, but but in any case, so they have a real focus. Those are, and there's one other thing that distinguishes them. And as I see Benny from the labor movement, who is so cool, what I say is they actually, the third thing that distinguishes them is that they have a something called a social council. So when Ellen went through that book and she was reading about the board, she was reading about worker owners who elect the board of directors. And so you kind of, and the board of directors typically will select management. Like these are the entities that you would tend to find in a worker co-op. What Mondragon's model adds to the mix is a different entity called a social council. And this entity actually functions like a union in many, many ways, because what it is doing is trying to be a conduit between management and workers on a very daily basis. How do we make sure communication is happening? Which you might think, if everyone are worker owners, why an additional structure that would help do this? But Mondragon's experience was when their co-ops got large enough, and at 50 people, that's when they started to notice that there could be a real disconnect in day-to-day things happening where different decisions were being made with insufficient input. And it actually led to a strike in Mondragon in the 70s in one of the co-ops. After which they doubled down on this to say, we're going to have this as a place, this social council as a place to handle any conflicts that naturally arise among humans. And we're going to have this as a place to just a reinforcing structure to help us maintain everyone's involvement. I think a key question in the US has been, how do you scale a co-op and maintain your values? And this is a really neat addition Mondragon offers, this reinforcing structure. And so when Mondragon made that historic partnership with the steelworkers in 2009, they brought into the US this idea of the union co-op, it's really just a co-op that has this other structure. In the US, instead of calling it the social council, we call it the union committee. But it's about trying to put in place a structure that can help us grow with values and transparency and scale in those sorts of ways. But of course, it also allows us to tap into a million positive things about the labor community, including natural areas of solidarity, consciousness that exist in the best practices there, but also many other things. Like when I think about church involvement, faith community involvement with co-ops, I think of a bunch of stuff. So I think of that basically, I think in part about Ecclesiastes, right? Like there's a time to tear up, and there's a time to, wait a minute, what do they say exactly? A time to tear down and a time to build up, right? I'm getting my things, tear up and build. It sounded confusing to me, but there's like that at both times that we have to be involved in all of this work. Like there's a lot of unjust structures in our society. And so being able to connect and tear those up or tear them down, whichever way we're going, like we want to be a part of those efforts. And that's something that the labor movement tends to be involved with, all kinds of policies that are like changing policies that are unjust. And then I think this co-op movement is an example of how do we build this? How do we build up? How do we build up the community, this beloved community we want to see? So I think it is neat to get to be a union co-op and get to be in both worlds, to be touching and doing both to some extent. But I see like all kinds of really concrete ways, and I can describe within our I probably already talked for 7 or 8 or maybe already 10 minutes. What do you think? How are we doing? Oh, good. A time to break down and a time to build up. Thank
You
you.
got
I'm
plenty of
on the
time.
call with the right
Keep going.
people.
You're
Oh, we
great.
have
Yeah.
plenty of time. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to show you, I think I'll show you for a moment our co-op network that's in formation, a picture of that. And then I'll tell you about the kinds of collaborations we have with different faith communities. And then just answer your questions. So I'm going to share my screen if the host enables it. Let's see. Oh,
You should be
perfect.
good now. Go for it. Yeah.
I am good. I'm good. Okay, cool. Okay. Oops. I'm trying to share a graphic. Oh, my internet. Oh, oh no. Hold on. Can you guys, I was trying to hit present, but I must have hit. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So the first picture you saw was one of our newest co-ops called a TLC, a home care co-op. But basically, this is who we are. Rosemary mentioned that we have this transitions to worker ownership piece, and we just launched a $3 million fund with our connection to the Seed Commons and got 12 local businesses applied, and we're going to be selecting finalists to move on in December. So that is cool. Co-op education and culture building is a huge part of what we do. Another thing that Ellen said earlier that I really liked is, well, like when she was talking about basically how do you balance margin and mission, how do you balance shared ownership and business acumen, all of those things, like those are real issues. And for people, most of us actually have not had training on business. But lots of us have had different access to formal training in general. And so in order for this to work, in order for us to really truly bring in people who have been historically excluded, this has to receive a ton of attentionality. So with our co-ops, which are the ones that are over here, all of those in the circle. Oops, that's the next one. We actually meet with each of them every week. So every week there is a team meeting where we're actually helping to, it's all about participatory management, and it's all about learning. We play a great game of business to make it simpler to understand the financials and easier to grasp. We do communication trainings we don't do this every, like I'm telling you what we do over a course of a year, plus we have retreats with them, but also it's problem solving of the different issues, all kinds of things. But there's a real intentionality to this sort of training. And one of the things, as our co-op network starts growing, one of the things we're really coming up against are our own constraints. And so a perfect place and luckily, we have been developing connections with all sorts of people, including the faith communities I'll mention, to actually be supportive in this role, to help out with these weekly meetings, or to help out with a workshop that people can attend together, to be a mentor for a specific co-op beyond our own mentoring, to be on the board of a specific co-op. Right now, all of our co-ops are comprised of workers on those co-ops, but also have outside members, which also help. And that's a really interesting place for people to participate on. So we also do something called Co-op U, which is a 12-week support for cooperative startups. Oops, those are some co-op workers. Hold on. And then we have the loan fund, the peer loan fund through the Seed Commons. So that is the financial cooperative that we're a part of, that the Southeast Cooperative Development Center is a part of. It's a great organization. And then if you just look over here, these are the co-op that are currently, we have a cleaning co-op, a compost co-op, a touch of TLC is what we just saw, the home care co-op. Bhutanese Bari is our newest one. It's a grocery delivery co-op. Our Harvest is our oldest one. It's a food and a farm hub, a food hub and a farm that is now going into its 9th year. Sustainergy, the second oldest, it's a residential installation and construction. Then Care Share is child care co-op. Renting Partnerships and Dividend Housing is a really awesome way. Renting Partnerships is a land trust, and Dividend Housing is a real estate investment co-op. And it's about bringing a really amazing way of doing affordable housing where people are actually building financial equity in the process. Apple Street over here has been incorporated for a long time, has 1,300 community owners, but is still looking for a location. It lost a location. It's had a series of mishaps, has a really interesting opportunity right now. So here's hoping. But that's our network. So I will just tell you a few of the ways that people participate, like church groups currently participate. We have a really close relationship with the Episcopal Church Christ Church Cathedral. Actually, a number of you have been that's where we have been hosting our Union Co-op symposiums. We work with them in so many ways. They help so when you are part of the Seed Commons Financial Cooperative, you have access to national funds, but you can also have your own proprietary funds as well that are housed there. They helped us start with $50,000 in a loan fund, and they are on our loan committee that meets every month to go over potential loans. So we have members of Christ Church Cathedral that are on that. We have members from a lot of different churches, like all different kinds. And well, I guess mosques too, and even a Hindu temple. So kind of cutting across the board, but we do have mentors for most of our co-ops from some sort of faith community connection. So I think mentoring is a really beautiful place. I think a loan committee is a really beautiful place. I think a place where we have a lot of people, a lot of church groups that are involved with food access. So we have a number of co-ops that are in that kind of realm. So we have church groups that are involved with gleaning. Our Harvest donates to a church group called Churches Active in Northside. And we have the St. Andrew's Episcopal Society. So people tend to get involved in that one quite a lot. Where else do we? Okay. So then when we talk about that whole, I'm going to get it mixed up again. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But when we talk about a time to break down and a time to build up, I wanted to check out the verse again because it's all wrong in my head today. We also work with a group called Amos, which is, I think it's the Gamaliel one. I get those mixed up, but we work with them on different policy ones. And so are working with people from a lot of different faith communities. We also have worked closely with a group called Economics of Compassion in Cincinnati and the Jubilee group, which again is made up of people from different faith communities. So I think, and then there's one other, I was just thinking that we work closely with a group called New Prospect Baptist Church that is also very interested in they're super interested in the cooperative commonwealth. It's awesome that you have Jessica speaking soon. She has come to Cincinnati a few times, and she is an incredibly extraordinary transformational speaker. And this is a Black Baptist church that is extremely interested, wants to do in what she has to say, and wants to do a credit union and something. They actually have all sorts of different ideas. so I think we will be working really closely with them in this coming year, on some of their plans. So I think, oh, but I did just remember that also a Catholic church asked how they could participate more deeply in what we do. And I wrote up a list for them, which I'm looking for right now, of 5 things, 5 sort of general areas. And maybe I'll just copy that or forward it to Rosemary, and you could get that. But it basically said build awareness, connect, participate, support. And there were things under each of those. And one of them was co-host a book club of collective courage. To build awareness. So I'm going to forward that to Rosemary right now while I'm thinking about it, and she can send it along. Okay. So I said a bunch. Questions, comments, thoughts? Ellen, who's on mute.
Sorry, I just raised my hand. I didn't stack. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm not in
Okay.
charge.
I'm very interested to know if you have any like data or just how your faith-based community partnerships support as actual customers and you as clients using your services. What kind of success do you have there? And how did you do it?
Yeah, that is definitely, when you see the thing I sent Rosemary, which by the way, I realize I have a lot of, did you get it? Because I have a lot of emails for you. So I don't know which one. She got it. Okay, so one of the things, I did write that. It was like, share the information about our co-ops, invite people to spend their money in these ways that build the kind of economy we want to see. So what data do we have? So our harvest has 300 customers. So I think they're like 300 families that get vegetables every week. There it's pretty easy to see because people will identify how did they find out about it and so forth. So there are definitely a number of these groups that I mentioned that have spread the word to that particular one. Similarly, Sustainergy, when it does the residential insulation or mold remediation or sound attenuation, or they're now in solar, they are always asking where their customers coming from. So some of the time for sure, it's through some of this outreach through these communities. A Touch of TLC has benefited a lot from this kind of network that we're in. One thing Co-op Cincy does is we have a mailing list, an email list that we try to send out once a month. And we try, but we don't every single month, but to include like something about each co-op and how people can get involved and use their services. And so that goes to people. So people get on that list from a lot of these different connections. So I think that is one way that it works. But people who are directly, like I'll say the people that are most motivated are those that are like mentors to the co-ops or on the boards. Because then they are trying that's just really top of mind. So they are to get them. But customers, I'm just trying to think about some of the other ones. The cleaning co-op, this came from one of our contacts at Christ Church. I don't know if this is going to work, but one of the things they did is he happened to know someone who works with Cincy Klein Services, which is a group. Who Cincy Klein is that Cincinnati or is that national? They're a big real estate group in Cincinnati, and they have a group called Cincy Klein Services, and that is a place where any realtor of Cincy Klein can call to say, I need a really serious house cleaning, or I need a recommendation for insulation, etc. So they gave us a direct contact for our co-ops that are applicable, our cleaning co-op, our residential insulation, and so forth. So this is relatively new. So I don't know if that's going to work out, but it's a lovely possibility that they could become an approved contractor there. That wasn't on our radars. So that was like a neat thing. Mhm.
Rosemary, you go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Kristen, for your presentation. It was great to hear like all your connections and how you've built that up with faith communities. I was wondering if you could tell us more about how you got people at the church interested in the loan fund, and how that effort played out.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that, yeah, that's a good question. And I'm trying to even think specifically how that went down. So I think we had long-term pre-existing relationships with the church before we asked for that. So like the beginning of Co-op Cincy, we got together. We had a lot of connections in faith communities, in labor communities, and like just community groups. So we had a big gathering that got those kinds of folks together. And so some people from Christ Church were a part of that, like way back before we were Co-op Cincy, before we were Cincinnati Union Co-op Initiative, before when we just were like just starting. Um, so so I think over the course of time, we were talking about the importance of a loan fund. Like I think from our very beginning, we wanted to start a loan fund, and then we looked into it and we were like, oh my God, this is like impossible. And so then it became, once we found out about the opportunity with the seed commons, that they would house it, they would handle the logistics. Like we didn't have like, it just became so exciting. So I think we brought that to them so they were a part of what we were doing. And then we said, is this something they have a grant? They have like a granting place. Like they within their church, they're a very large presence in Cincinnati. Um and then I think we just asked, I'm trying to think if maybe even they suggested it. Like it might have honestly been like, as we were talking about this and this amazing opportunity, we could be a part of this. We have the opportunity to have our own propriety fund. I honestly wonder if in one of our committees, one of them suggested that they would try, and here's what they would need for such a thing.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting.
I got a question. Actually, several ones, but let me start with one, Kristen. I really like your emphasis on building up as well as breaking down, because both are needed. But in my experience, it's usually much more difficult to talk about breaking down with church people or in churches. So I'm wondering if how are you doing that, if it's happening? And what the responses from churches are, because I could imagine they'll also be a bit apprehensive about that.
Well, I mean, what's so nice is like Amos is one of our partners, right? Which is deeply in at the churches. And I think, I mean, I think the people that we knew ahead of time were certainly part of the social justice circles within the church. So for the people that have been our long-term supporters, that is not a reach at all. They are actively working on immigration issues. They are actively working on human trafficking. They are actively working on labor issues, So I think the subset that we work with, that is not hard. I think that we haven't, trying to think if we have at all, we haven't spoken to a general church. Like it's not like we've done I don't think we've ever done, for example, we haven't done a sermon or anything like that, or like a homily, whatever the reflection is what it's called when a non-priest does it, I guess. But we haven't done that to a wider body. So in some ways, I think I don't know the answer, but I do agree that to the wider mainstream thing, it's probably easier to support a co-op than it is to support a Yeah, to support something, a more political action that's trying to uproot injustice.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I mean, this is all very helpful for us because those are some of the questions we're trying to investigate and trying to explore and ultimately implement also. The other question I had, now talking more specifically about the groups in the churches that you're working with, do you find that engaging what you're doing, of course, meeting your staff and all the projects, helps them deepen some of their justice commitments? Because that's the other thing I sometimes find in the church. There may be a group that's really opposed to wage theft, which is a great place to get churches involved because it's morally wrong, and there cannot be a discussion about the value or the merits of wage theft.
Right.
But take a group like that and try to plug it in sort of a wage depression debate, or what's happening with worker rights and so on. It's much more difficult. So I'm wondering if you're seeing some progress there also, that people sort of get deeper into it, more aware, maybe develop more critical understanding.
That is such a good question. What I think I would say is, it is probably true that in terms of the people that are most, well, maybe some of the mentors actually, yes. Yes, I would think that might be the case for some of the mentors. I was going to say kind of the people that are super involved with us have already are just really folks that are really, really plugged in and are really, really actively involved. So it's almost like we're dealing with the kind of the choir, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't know, I think, except for some of our mentors, which is why we actually have a mentor training, to try to help people become aware of various biases they may have, and things like various ways they may be looking at different kinds of people without sort of noticing that. So we do have an actual 2-hour sort of mentor training that invites people to understand co-ops a little better, but then go deeper into how do we be the best mentor fit? How am I looking at people? How do I build on people's assets? Do I accidentally feel certain ways that, I don't know. I can send you, if you're interested, in our format. So I think our mentor, that's probably the space where I think there could be some neat movement. I would say also actually co-op workers. So that's less but we have co-op workers that come to us from all different backgrounds and have all different ways of looking at the world. And like, we meet people where they're at, which is all over the place. And then our goal is to just constantly open minds, and help people experience more of the world than they might have seen, or another way of looking at something.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kristen. Yeah, please send us that material you have
Yeah,
on
I'll send you the
mentor
mentor
training. I
training.
think that's, yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
I'm writing that down.
Can I jump in here on that, particularly because in looking over the list that you sent to Rosemarie, and the fact that you provided that as one way where churches can connect in, I wonder if you can talk more about that mentoring program, and how you think it allows churches to connect and support more deeply with your work.
Well, so I think that churches have within them, a broad spectrum of people, many people that have experience in business. So when we talked about that business acumen before, that business acumen is really needed. It's like, this is super tough to make these things work. And so you want around every co-op, whether they're a mentor, whether they're on the advisory board, whether they're on the board itself, but you want the co-op to have all sorts of support. You want them to have all kinds of ways to connect, to be more successful, to identify opportunities. Sort of the more people connected to a co-op doing well, the more creativity you can draw upon, the deeper connections you can find customers with, the more opportunities to problem solve. There's all just kinds of things. So it is interesting that when you truly, truly, truly need business acumen. And so there tends to be quite a lot of that in faith communities. And now some of that business acumen comes along with a whole series of life experiences that that are very valuable, but also are constrained because only one person can do so many things, whatever. So this is why we additionally have that mentoring training to kind of help us recognize that we all we use one of the things we use is that ladder of inference. Have you ever done that? It's basically this idea. I don't know. It's one of those famous guys that with organizational development, maybe Peter Senge. I'm not sure though. Don't take that to the bank. Look at my materials. But it's something that's recognize that basically in order to live, because we have a million sensations, a million pieces of information hitting us at any second. So in order to talk, move, eat, do what we need to do, our brain has to make assumptions. It cannot look at every piece of data newly every time. There's no way. Otherwise, that was all we do. We'd just be here. And, so it's completely impractical. And so because this is how our mind works, once we've kind of tried to simplify our life and had a certain amount of experiences, and we get a certain belief, well, then the way we work, because again, our mind is interested in simplifying, is it's just we naturally reinforce that which we what our existing belief is. That's the type, while there's a ton of data out there, we pay more attention to that which reinforces our existing belief. And so then from our beliefs, that's how we take actions, and that's there. So what we do is we try to shine a light on, this is very natural. This is what we do to survive and to live. If there's some problems with how we do this though, and here are some of the issues. Here are some of the things that that we find that can get in the way of connecting authentically. So connecting authentically and openly and being able to see fully what's in front of you, So say a person might be not speaking in a grammatically correct way, but the content of what they're saying is super powerful. So are we going to get tripped up by that grammatical correct thing and miss the content? Well, we could, but we could also help ourselves be aware that this might happen, and then, have this be an opportunity for us to, look deeper, open our eyes more, see more of the world, that kind of thing.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in here before we get to Stack. I want to check your time. Yes.
Yes, that's good, because I do have another meeting that started 4 minutes ago.
Okay. Yeah. So, thank you so much for your time today, Kristen. We really appreciate it. I think we've got a number of other questions actually in the stack. Can we?
Oh, really?
Yeah. I know we got Steve.
This is more fun than my next meeting.
Well, we don't know what your next meeting is. We're having a lot of fun too. So we really appreciate it. Can we send you some questions via email?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yep.
All right.
That sounds like a plan.
Wonderful.
Yeah, no, I have to go to a grant reporting thing. It's really awful. But thank you for this. This was very fun, and I'm glad you exist, and it's nice to see your faces. So good luck with all of your work. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, friends. Thank you for that. It was amazing how quick that 20 or 15 minutes went. And I know, Stephen, you had a question, so I'm sorry to cut you off. Why don't we take a brief 5-minute break, a bio break, and we'll come back and we'll debrief a little bit of that meeting. Stephen, you can, if your question, and Benny, I see that you had one too. I'm sorry, I'm looking up now. We can start there if there are some group conversations, and if not, then I've got I'm going to guide us through a conversation that'll help us think through all the experiences that we've had this past semester and then bring us into the spring. So we'll see you here in 5 minutes.
Thanks.
That you can see that we've got on the agenda for us, and we'll end about at 11:55 and kind of wrap up any other miscellaneous items we might have. What I'd like to suggest that we do is we handle one question as a sort of larger group. And for some of you who may be more familiar with this exercise, so this explanation will be redundant to you. So what I'd like us to do is handle this first question, namely, what about cooperatives deepens the church? But I'd like for us all to, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to think about the question for a couple of minutes. As you can see, the first one is in the chat right now. And write out an answer to it in the chat, but don't send it in the chat yet, right? So Jorg and Juan, we did this in the last faculty meeting. So the idea is for all of us, what will happen is that you all have written a response in the chat, but not have sent it yet in your text box. And then when I say go, or okay, send your chat or whatever, all the responses will come right away. And it'll be a kind of nice like dump of information, and we'll be able to see it all very quickly together. The idea then is for us all to kind of take a look over the responses and have a brief conversation about that as a group. I figure that'll take about 5 minutes, and then the rest of the time we'll break up into random groups of about 3 or 4 people and handle the other kind of more deeper questions. What's missing? What would you like to learn? What are specific examples and stories do you recall from the conversations that might be worth sharing with others? Things like that. Does that sound like an okay way forward for us to proceed for the rest of our time together? Okay, great. So hearing oh yeah, Juan, sorry.
So just, Aaron, just to be clear, so we're just focusing on the first one in the chat, and then we're going to carry on with the 2 through 4 in small group conversation?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So here's the question that we'll all think about and perhaps formulate a response in your chat box without pressing enter. The question is, what about cooperatives deepens the church? So take a few minutes. I'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to type an answer. It doesn't have to be anything academic or scholarly. Just, we're thinking here with what it is we've learned in the group.
Could you repeat the question again?
Absolutely. So the question is, what about cooperatives deepens the church? I'm going to put it in the chat. What's helpful about this too is that we can save the chat afterwards and we'll be able to return to it later. So this is a good way for us to go for it. So spend a few minutes formulating an answer without pressing enter. And then when I say, we'll send our chat to each other in the chat box. Okay. So perhaps you heard that announcement. So if you can, why don't on 3, why doesn't everybody press enter and send your answers? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and send them in. All right, that's great. So take a moment and look at this, such wealth. Let's take a look over your answers, and then what do you notice? What are the commonalities emerge? What answers perhaps struck you? So what do we think here? I know this is great.
I see a lot of equity and community and the importance of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, Mary Lee. I saw community. Those are words that are hitting up often.
I was, something was rattling around in the back of my head, and a number of us hit on it, but I was thankful that Jorg just openly and outwardly said the phrase religious democracy, right? Because the thing is, thinking about how people can galvanize and utilize their power in a way that, even though they don't in a kind of raw, naked way think of it as political, or think of it as a form of ideology, right? To be able to participate and share with one another in this way is, I think, beautifully summed up in religious democracy. So
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that one. I think that's right. Other things? So one question I have on this before we go into small groups, noting all this, how do you take this and communicate it to other members in your church? What might be at least one element of things that need to happen? Now that you've got all these sort of thoughts, okay, this is how it is that cooperatives benefit the church, deepen the church. What's part of what needs to then happen in bringing that forward? Because this is the task of phase 2, right? This is the work then of constructing and sharing and bringing other people into the work. Ellen, yeah.
I think someone touched on it in the chat while we were listening to Kristen, because I see the word community a lot in the responses of people, but the definition that churches use, how they describe community, is so critical, especially in the white suburban church, which I can say as a member of a white suburban church. I mean, you hear the word community group nonstop. Join a community group. If you got a community group, get your community group. Sign up for community groups. And it's just so like-minded. There's not 1 ounce of diversity. There's not 1 ounce. Everybody's going to talk about their, same community, not a shared community, which is the theme that I see in what cooperatives opens up an opportunity for the white suburban churches to enter into a community they are very unfamiliar with and very uncomfortable going, to be fair to people, especially if you've been raised in that kind of white suburban church community where all you do is your own church camps, your own community groups, your outreach consists of going in, not entering in, going in and leaving, so that is a message that the church definitely needs to hear, the white suburban church needs to hear? I don't know how receptive they'll be, but they need to hear it.
I think that's what I really like about what you've said. I mean, I think I agree completely with a lot of what you've said. My own church experience at Second Presbyterian Church here in Nashville. Community is a huge word, but no one really actually understands what it means. But what's helpful about that is that you're giving us these handles, right? Community might be one term that we, that's what does community mean to you, right? And then you give that as an entryway into the conversation of, well, this is what community ownership and worker ownership looks like. And so that's a way to that's an entry point in. It opens a door. So that was very helpful for me. I see Juan, and then I know Jorg wanted to go, and Stephen. Wonderful. This is great.
Yeah, just piggybacking on what Ellen was sharing, because I was actually responding to Aaron in that whole phrasing of community outreach, right? And the problem of it, because I think, Ellen, you beautifully summarized it in terms of, white suburban churches. And when it's community outreach, it's the community, those folk out there, not, anyone in the sanctuary or anyone within our kind of setting. Looking at this from a Black church perspective, right? When we think about community, we're thinking about, okay, everybody that's within the sanctuary and, their cousins and their mothers and their aunties. But then the outreach part is usually fueled by, okay, what's the latest crisis, right? It's not usually a kind of consistent or sustained kind of, movement towards building, a kind of credit union, for instance, the debate that we're putting on the table, right? It's usually like, okay, what went wrong and how do we fix what just went wrong? Like, it's usually much more of a quick fix rather than a long view. But also something I wanted to add, and once again, thank you so much, Ellen, for your review earlier, because one thing that you framed there that I thought was really beautiful, and I think is going to fuel a lot of our future conversation, is the idea that a dysfunctional company would ultimately lead to a dysfunctional co-op, right? Form doesn't necessarily follow function, right? Like, so the issue is just by changing how ownership or operation works doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Like, if you've got stinking thinking at the core of what you're doing, it's going to still stink regardless of how you jazz it up. So that's all. So I think a cooperative has to be prompted by the best intentions rather than the worst instincts of any congregation or any community.
Yeah, wonderful. Jorg? We've got Jorg and Stephen.
So I would wonder if it would be also appropriate to have a deeper conversation about what the church is ultimately all about, because I think there's a real problem, right? If you're in a soccer club, it's about playing soccer. If you're in a church, I mean, for a lot of people, I think it's going to a performance Sunday morning, singing some hymns, listening to a sermon, staring up to the sky a lot. I mean, seriously, this is sort of, or even if you have a deeper understanding of community, it's me and my friends getting together, and I'm so much enjoying this every Sunday. But I would really raise the question, is this the purpose of a church, right? So if we had that conversation, then we'd have to have conversations about all the things that were addressed now, right? Ellen's point about, sort of how do we open up these close communities? Juan's point about, what ultimately is that outreach about? And, we may well come to the conclusion that outreach and church are synonymous. It's not there's a church that then has an outreach project, but maybe the church is precisely, to reach people in the world, and this is how God is reaching people in the world, or something like that. So I'd go back one step and say, what's the purpose? What's the actual work of your community?
Yeah, that could definitely be a conversation we have in the spring as we begin to put meat on these ideas of how is it that we do this communicating work. Stephen?
As one who is in the church, I am always trying to redefine things. And so I'm in this season of redefining discipleship, because I think what we've done to it is you get to do it on your own consciousness, and you get to do it in a private way, and you get to do it with your own tribe. And so one of my questions would be, so do we need to redefine discipleship? Because if that's what the church is supposedly focused in doing, maybe the deconstruction of how we formed and shaped discipleship needs to be a priority. If that is the case, then discipleship is a holistic approach. So you can't exclude economics from that equation. You cannot exclude mission from that equation. You cannot exclude cooperatives from that equation. I mean, equity, diversity, inclusion. But that's what we've done because we are the westernized church. The Middle Eastern church has those components. And when it came across the sea, we decided to reframe it. So I think we need to spend some time with, as theologians, and Ellen, you're one of those, as theologians, to rethink through how we have continued to perpetuate this inequity, even with the language that we use, without redefining. I think we need an overhaul of our language.
I just want to, absolutely, I see we got Mary Lee here on the stack, but part of what's really important about this conversation is that the work then in the spring will be to create a number of videos that really gets at this relationship between cooperatives and the churches. And so our task will be to quickly and coherently explain and make a compelling case for why it is that churches should get involved in various ways. So these questions are all, I think, deeply generative to guiding that sort of conversation for us in the spring, and that's why I think this is a valuable time. That's also the work, as a refresher to you, the work that lies for us in the spring, right? Actually constructing videos, and we'll have more details on that later. But I see Mary Lee is in the stack.
Thank you, Aaron. So one of the things I think that we, at least I'll speak for my own church, which is a white suburban church. And I think one of you touched on this a minute ago. We call it community outreach, but we are reaching out, we're going in and then we're leaving. It's not like, and I think we've been called to reach out. And if we had another hand reaching back, that would be how it should work. But we reach out, we take our hand back. It's just, I don't know. I work a lot with the youth at my church, and they did this thing yesterday where they had us fold a piece of paper, and the paper looked like this. First, we wrote things we were concerned about, prayer requests, things we were concerned about on the paper. And then we folded it, and it looked like this. And this teenage kid says, okay, this is the church. You can kind of see the church. And then he said, the church does a lot of good, and it'll help you get through whatever you've written on the paper. It'll help you get through it. And then he said, now fold it like this. And at the time it had wings, but he said, now it's an airplane. So you can go a little further. You don't just stay in your little home church. You go a little further. The plane, you still got the problems, but with God's help, you can fly around and get bigger. And then he said, tear the wings off. So he said, now you got a rocket ship. And so the rocket ship can go all over the world, all over the universe, all over the galaxy. And he said, but ultimately the thing that you're left with is this. And anyway, I just thought it was kind of, if we could somehow get that through to all of our congregations, and that it's not us versus them, or any of that kind of thing. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. Anyway, that's just my very uneducated take on it. So anyway, yeah, thank you for letting me babble.
No, thank you, Mary Lee. And I think that sort of imagery is super helpful for us to sort of, you need quick tools like that to communicate the theological foundation for this work, so people don't get distracted and thinking that this is politics, not religion, right? Or this is economics, not religion. Show them that boat, the church, boat, airplane, rocket ship example that then has a theological foundation in the church's mission. And I think that's effective. Do we have other, so thank you for that. Do we have any thoughts or responses to this first one? I want to break us up into groups too, because we've got other questions to get to.
Maybe just
York?
briefly coming back what Mary Lee was saying about those two hands. I really like that. I sometimes talk about it as outreach and then in reach. So it's sort of this reaching right in both directions. And what's exciting to me about that is that, you know, once you build what you're suggesting, you know, this more permanent relationship, Mary Lee, then you also can think about how is this shaping the church in turn. So, I mean, quite frankly, a lot of my own self-interest in this project is I'm still hopeful that some of what we're doing here will have a positive impact on reshaping the churches that either have become narcissistic, completely self-centered, or when they're reaching out, you know, it's always in their own terms, in terms of, you know, their own interests and, you know, patronizing perhaps. So if we put those two things together, I think that's where this project here could be really helpful. And I think this is where maybe then our grant writing could also go, you know, where we communicate with you know, like Lily, the Lily Endowment and so on, that this is not just putting the church to use in a specific social project, but really reshaping the church as a whole from the bottom up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. I want to give us all enough chance to talk in breakout groups. So what we'll do is I'm going to break us up into groups of 4. And so we'll have just about, here, let me do this. I'm going to, yeah, okay, I'll move this to 4 and then move you to 1. Okay, so it'll be roughly 2 groups of 3 and 1 group of 4. Yeah, here are the 2. I'll send these, I'll broadcast these questions that we've got, but maybe if you have a second, please write these down or have the agenda out in front of you that's got the questions, because sometimes when you broadcast it, it cuts off the actual question. So the first one is, think of specific examples of stories that you recall from our conversations over the past several months that might be worth sharing with others. One mentioned the example of from the church in Dallas from Reverend Handy. I'm forgetting the structure, but the financial structure that he was talking about. So that's a worthwhile story there that we might think of. So that's a first one. The second question is, what would you like to know more about or discuss at a deeper level in terms of worker cooperatives, and perhaps even in terms of relationship between worker cooperatives and the churches? And then finally, sort of, with whom else do you think we should be talking to learn more about churches and economic democracy or the solidarity economy? So I will send these all to you again, but the first one here is thinking of stories, and the next 2 are, what else should we learn and who else should we be talking to? Okay, I'm going to send you to your rooms now. There we go. Selling, good. I'm always a little nervous clicking leave because I don't want to leave the whole meeting, just the breakout rooms. A little unnerving. But as people will come back, I bet I'm cutting them short. Oh, they've got another 30 seconds.
Oh, we
Oh,
got
they're pulling us out one at a time. So they took one first.
Oh no!
Oh no, there he's back. He's back.
Here I am. Here I am.
Yes.
Or just teleported.
Okay, Marcus is okay. We're all still here, I guess. Okay, I thought Juan had gotten taken away.
Sorry about that.
It could happen. It could happen.
We're good. Yeah, it's the rapture, and they took you, and I'm still here.
No, I thought you
We're
meant
all
the
left
folks from the
behind.
asylum.
We're all left behind. Oh boy.
Zoom rapture. That's,
Oh,
I'm
God.
sure that might be what some evangelical churches are doing on their Zoom services. Just doing the Zoom
You're right.
rapture.
You just see this big hook coming.
Oh boy.
Oh God.
Well, friends, we've got a few minutes left here. Are there highlights or things you want to share back? What are the stories that you thought worthwhile sharing? Who should we talk to, and what do you want to learn more about? Juan, please. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay. So from our group, we pulled, I think, at least 3 good examples. I think Megan and John from Grace Industries, right? I mean, aside from what they were doing, when Mary Lee and Marcus and I were talking, it wasn't just what they were doing, although that was, I think, inspirational and quite exemplary, but it's also how they were doing it. Their partnership, right, at the core of the endeavor, right? The division of labor, John doing the more pastoral ministerial stuff. And Megan, she was grinding, she was dealing with the business administration and management stuff. She was constantly thinking about branding and like how to build out. I thought that they were great for both what they were doing and also how they execute. We were also talking about Kristen, right? Bringing the riches of what she was just sharing, both in terms of the mentoring model. I think that was self-evident, but also, and we were talking about this in the chat earlier, right? The fact of the interfaith, multi-religious aspect of what she was doing, right? Calling out and reaching out to mosques and temples and synagogues, right? There could even be some capacity to reach out to, humanists and more agnostic folk, right? But it has a kind of larger vision. And then last but not least, thinking about the credit union model through what Freddie Haynes from Friendship West was sharing. I think especially in communities that are undervalued and under-resourced in terms of access to banking, and especially obviously as we're going to have to dig ourselves out of this current recession, due to COVID and everything Trump related. So anyway, I think those are the 3 offerings we would bring to the table.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll just jump in very quickly. You hit on the examples definitely for us. We had Kristen, the mentoring model. Those were lifted up. Megan and John were also important. So those are examples that we had. In terms of sort of who else do we need to talk to? We need to continue talking to each other. Several of our group members found this to be a really important, weaving of networks that's in a ecology that's fairly siloed. And finally, sort of what else might we need to do that would be helpful if we could actually map out some of these issues and thinking about do a sort of relational power, economic mapping of Nashville, but particularly North Nashville is one issue that we were thinking of. Did I miss anything from our group? I just want to make sure. So we've got one more group, and I think you were a part of it. I'm not quite sure who else was a part of it.
I think Eli was taking notes, right?
There you are, Eli. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to distinguish which questions with which answers, or just kind of what we were talking about?
If you just give it all, it's great. I'm taking notes.
Okay. Well, we mentioned a lot of different moments from what we've heard over the past few months, specifically like the Beloved Community Incubator with Luther Place Church and how it's connected to Ray Pickett's work, and the history of Christian socialism and connecting to historical examples of how, and recognizing how the church has changed, especially white suburban churches have changed to be more inward and narcissistic and isolated from community. We were, and Jorg can talk more about this if I'm not summarizing his words correctly, but that there are kind of two projects, one about organizing within mainline churches, but also another about trying to connect to people and connect among people who have not given up their faith, but maybe have given up on a church space or a church community, or at least feel alienated from the one that they identify with. And we talked about how we can continue the discussion about roadblocks and difficulties to developing cooperative power and cooperative networks. And Rosemary brought up that we want to look more across the world to see global examples about how this work, or work that is aligned with connecting faith spaces and making them discussions or engines of economic democracy, how that's happening all across the world, and that we want to learn more about that. And then also John brought up at the end that we want to talk to each other, but also to people who would never find their way into this group, who maybe are not associated with Vanderbilt, or maybe who are across the city and find faith communities that maybe they're Spanish speaking, or maybe they mosques or places that are very strong centers of communities that we really don't have a lot of representation of in this group with. So, yeah.
If I could add two more things. Thanks so much for summarizing, Eli. That's what we had talked about. With those two groups, I was also thinking about the one group that Kristen called the choir. So, working with people who are already advanced, who already have a critique, of capitalism, you name it, and who want to do something more advanced. And then you have the other group, sort of the main line, that needs to see, that their concerns might also be related. So that was one other thought. And the other piece I mentioned that was going back to what Ellen was saying this morning in her presentation, really talking about the hangups and the roadblocks of what we're getting into, because I think that's really crucial. So Ellen, I really appreciated you raising some of the difficult questions, right? Saying these are some of the problems we'll have to face. And there I was thinking if Benny and Rosemary could talk specifically about the roadblocks they're finding here in Nashville, so we get some local stories. And of course, we're not talking about roadblocks to shut things down, but to say, well, how do we address these things? How is that our life? How do we overcome that? How do we get stronger?
Yeah, it's very helpful. Okay, friends, I know we're about 4 minutes over. So if there aren't any other questions or comments on this, I've got these in notes. We will see you on Thursday morning with Jessica Gordon-Nemhard and Ed Whitfield. So we're really excited to have them. Don't miss it. It'll be a powerhouse. And don't forget that we've got Juan leading us off. So this is great. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
See you Thursday.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.